as the urban core, which is appropriate since we didn't have any other data. But notice how if you look at functional urbanization in terms of density and work trip market share, it stretches out beyond. So that nationally, go ahead, Rick. Okay, there's Phoenix, for example. Do you see an urban core there? No. Keep going. Population by functional sector. Okay, go ahead, you don't need that one. If you look at 2000 to 2010, that's the wrong one, sorry. Okay, in 1990, 18% of the urban area, of the metropolitan areas that are above 1 million today were considered urban core. Now it's dropped to 16% in 2000 and now to 14%. So that when you hear all this stuff about people moving back to the cities, and by the way, there are some exceptions. Seattle's doing well, Denver's doing well, most places are not, but even in these places that are doing well, if you look at the 2000 to 2010 census, what you find is that the area within 2 miles of City Hall gained, the area between 2 and 5 miles lost overall. So that's one of the things to consider. Next, please. Don't need that. The millennials. The millennials are all moving to the cities. Well, not quite. 80% of millennials do not live in urban cores, and the percentage of millennials living in urban cores is actually declining. What's happening? You're getting the yuppies, as we sometimes call them, moving to downtown, and you're getting a loss of millennials in the area close in. And you see what's going on. The earlier suburban losing, the later suburban gaining, and the ex-urban, that's outside the urban area, gaining. Go ahead. Boomers, the same thing. I mean, what a bunch of baloney that anybody believes that boomers are moving to the city. All you have to do is look at the numbers. The Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post came out with a story on this, some data out of a real estate firm. I challenged them. The Wall Street Journal retracted the story based upon the data, and the Washington Post stonewalled. Go ahead. Doesn't matter. Here's the real interesting thing, though. This is looking at employment. And if you, well, let's go one on, because I don't want to keep you too much on this. Population and employment. In the urban core, you see 14.4% of the people in the metropolitan area live in the urban core. Look at the jobs, only 16.2. What people don't realize is that cities are incredibly decentralized. It is wrong to even call them polycentric. They have become essentially almost random in their employment distribution, except that downtown is bigger. So what you see happening, what you see is that there are more jobs in the inner suburbs than there are people, percentage-wise. You get out, it gets a little bit lower. Go ahead. And so you see the job performance in the last 10 years, the urban core losing a little bit, the earlier suburbs, these are the suburbs developed before 1980, dropping hugely, the later suburbs gaining, the exurbs gaining, and this is an amazing thing when you consider we just went through something that was the biggest depression in 80 years. Next, please. We don't need that. Now, work trip mark. A lot of people have this view that, of course, everybody works downtown, which they don't. In the average metropolitan area, 7% of people work downtown. There's this view that you know, you're going to get to work faster in the urban core. That's what we're told by the urban planners. Again, you look at this, you find that the fastest work trip travel times are actually in the early suburbs, because that's what you would expect. That's where most of the people are and the largest number of jobs. But in fact, later suburban areas and even ex-urban areas do better than the urban core. Now, this isn't the case in all cases, but this is the amalgam of 52 metropolitan areas. Next, please. This is your percentage of CBD employment, downtown employment. New York, the highest, the second largest business district in the world at 20%. You see Seattle down here about 10, and this is a broad definition of Seattle. We tried to make it fairly broad, but you can see that for the most part, the downtown employment share is not that good. Thank you. Don't need that. Commute share, 55%. And this chart doesn't say it, but I'll tell you. 55% of all the transit commuting in the United States is to 6 cities. Now, by cities, I'm not talking about the urban area or the metropolitan area. I'm talking about the other definition for a city, which is a municipality. You take New York, Chicago, Philadelphia, Boston, Washington, and San Francisco. 55% of all transit commuting is to those places. And, by the way, 2/3 of that is downtown. So when you start talking about transit systems that move you around the city, forget it. It's impossible. Brookings Institution says that 8% of the jobs are within 45 minutes reached by the average commuter in major metropolitan areas. Transit is about downtown. This is something that transit planners do not understand. Okay, keep going. Well, go back just on that. Here we see that approximately 75% of the people who work south of 59th Street in New York are on transit. You know what? Transit's real important there. You go all the way down to San Francisco, Boston, Chicago, they're above 50, Washington's 40, Philadelphia is about 40, and mind you again, Seattle is doing very well. It's not quite up to the other 6, but it's by far the strongest below the other 6.
What is CBD?
Central Business, downtown, I'm sorry. Trying to rush through it because I don't want to take too much time here. Okay, next, cities and density. What a lot of people don't realize is the incredible loss in densities that have occurred in cities around the world. If you look at Paris, and you can't see, yeah, well, you can hardly see it. Paris in 1800, almost 100,000 per square mile. And this is the urban area. This isn't the municipality there. London was the same. Now, Paris goes up and goes down here, and there's the density of Paris right now. Now, interestingly, look at Los Angeles. You know that the Paris urban area is about 10,000 per square mile, and the Los Angeles urban area is 7,000 per square mile. Fewer people drive in Paris than in Los Angeles, but not by that much, by that big a margin. Next, there's marvelous research done by the Santa Fe Institute that basically says if you double the size of a city, you're going to increase the productivity by 15%. Now, the urban planners, and I write a weekly blog on this, on these kinds of issues, the urban planners, when this research came up and said, see, that proves that density makes cities more productive. So I went into their data and found out that, in fact, they specifically indicated it had nothing to do with density. And the final, I think this is my final slide, the final proof of it is that Hartford is the 912th most dense, in other words, almost the least dense, of 922 urban areas of more than 50,000 people. Yet it is the most productive in the world. Anybody that tells you don't, you know, I know a lot of people quote Ed Glazer in the Triumph of the Cities, and they say, oh, you know, proves that density does it. Well, you know, if you read Ed closely, you realize he doesn't say that. When he says city, he means metropolitan area. He doesn't mean, you know, what a lot of people think. So that, and think about it in the United States. Think about another very productive place. San Jose. San Jose has a population density of 6,000 people. Okay, compare that to London at 15, to Paris at 10, to Dhaka at 105, 115. The point is that Santa Clara is very productive, and don't forget Seattle. San Jose's at 6,000, Seattle's only at 3,000. And I don't really believe that density was the driving force in Bill Gates and his success and others in Seattle. So anyway, I don't know if that's the last.
What's the definition of productivity?
Well, there are any number of ways to do it. In the case of what I've been talking about is GDP per capita. Now the problem, though, there is another problem with GDP per capita. And this has come out in some more recent stuff that we and others have done. And that's, for example, if you look, the new data is just out on personal income per capita out of the American Community Survey. If you look at personal income per capita, I'm sorry, median income of houses, household median income, what you find is that San Jose is about $80,000 per household. Houston's about 60. If you go in and adjust for the cost of new housing, because in San Jose, a new house costs 8.7 times median incomes, in Houston 3 times. And by the way, they were the same 40 years ago, before the coming of smart growth. The fact is that a lot of these cities that we consider very productive, if you were to go in and do a real discretionary income analysis, what's left after you pay for everything, they wouldn't rate so well. So cities like Houston and Dallas do very well, but it's good enough for government work. What do you want? So anyway, now that's sort of a quick overview. Do you have any questions or anything? Yes?
You talked about the percentage of trips are on transit. You showed Seattle at 40%.
Right.
I understand that's the commute, direct work to home and from your office back, but even in downtown Seattle, it's less than 15% of all the trips at the PM peak. So,
well, I don't know about that. The data that I'm using is from the CTPP census data out of the 2006 to 2010 ACS. The data there is my calculation of that data. Now, again, one has to figure out what a downtown is, and nobody agrees upon what that is. What I did in 2000 is I went in and I assigned, based upon my knowledge and review of maps and Google Earth, what the downtown should be. I've seen downtown Seattle, for example, defined by some people to be completely everything to the west of Interstate 5 and Pike Market down to Smith Tower. That's not downtown. Downtown's bigger than that. But I wouldn't take downtown all the way to Lake Union. So again, a lot of the differences in these may have to do with just different assumptions. But Seattle's about 35%, something like that. Part of the reason Seattle's better, but not a lot, it's only a couple of percentage points, is the ferry to Bainbridge and Bremerton, because, you know, not a lot of people take ferries to work in Oklahoma City. So, other questions or comments? Okay. Now, you came here to get some ideas, etc., and see the some pulling down of data and so on. What kind of things would you be interested in seeing? I've got my own agenda, but I want to try to show you what might be useful to you. And yes, ma'am.
Population growth, with these regional plans, they come in with these enormous
Right.
projections
Right.
of population growth, which we know are not valid, but we never have proof of them.
This is a good one, and actually, Rick, if I could I take over then, because I'll get back on the internet here.
You're going to be giving us your website up there.
Oh yeah. By the way, my website. Well, I have a personal website, but it's not. I don't know how helpful it'd be. www.demographia DEMOGRAPHIA.com. Oh, and here's the blog site I do every week. We're now up to about 600 posts in the last few years. And in addition to that, go ahead. I'm sorry, Gary.
I just wanted to, I didn't want to interrupt you.
Oh, okay.
But I did want to see where you get your urban boundaries from.
Oh, okay. And that's, well, this, by the way, this is our product, and it's there, and I'll be happy to give this. I think Randall will probably post it as well. And on a PDF that will actually click through. This is my analysis of the 52 largest metropolitan areas and their downtown employment. This is my annual Demographia urban areas. Now, this is the product you're talking about. We cover the new version, because there's new UN stuff that's just come out, but I'm not going to be in a position to really publish it till early in the year. The next version is going to show just over 1,000 cities of more than 500,000. It turns out the UN's discovered all sorts of new ones. That may seem strange, but the state of city analysis at the international level is really dreadful. This happens to be Pudong in, actually the Pudong waterfront in Shanghai. But what we do, the US Census Bureau actually designates urban areas. So you can actually go to the census site and get urban area data, population and land area. And by the way, in case of any of you are interested, realize that when you get outside the United States, nobody knows what a square kilometer is, or square mile is. They only know square kilometers. If you want to know density per square kilometer, you divide the mileage figure. Let's say LA's, actually 6,999 is the LA density. You divide 6,999 by 2.59, and you get the population per square kilometer. Now, there are other countries, Canada, France, there's some data in India that's not too good, the United Kingdom and so on. This urban area concept is really expanding. It was really started in the US, Canada, and the United Kingdom. But when we get outside these places where I don't have, because I'm lazy, I'm not going to do 200 cities if I don't have to, if the Census Bureau's already done it. I go to Google Earth and I actually draw perimeters. And I've got a program that allows me to find out how much space is inside that. And so we've got backup maps that we have produced on all of these, though we've not published because of potential copyright problems. But still, that's what we use. That's where we get the data. Yes?
Don't forget, wait.
What was that number,
Please,
2.9?
2.59.
5.
Please answer her question, which she asked first, about the ways in which planners are projecting and doing it.
Oh, I'm going to get to that.
Okay, just
Yeah.
don't forget it.
Yeah, but do remind me. Thank you. Let's see here. Well, I had something. Apparently, it wasn't that. I can't remember what it was now. All right. So your question on population. Here's a big problem. First of all, the internet is invaluable, but the problem is the census site in the United States, which is really the best, census.gov, doesn't do a good job with historic data. Now, and so you have to scout around for it. If anybody's interested, I can provide individual files of the 100 largest cities since 1790, every census. But you know, if for example you live in Phoenix, that doesn't help you much because you don't get on that list until 1950, and in some others it's a lot later. But you have to poke around for it, and that's what I also have to do on this urban stuff. Because when I get outside the United States and I have an urban area I've drawn, I've got to go find the census data for that country to try to figure out what the population is inside that. And I've got all sorts of ways to do it, but we're not going to get into that. Now let's talk about the historic population. Let's go to that first. We can go to, okay, you're probably not going to be able to read this very well, but if we want to know, first of all, this site is the American Community Survey, I'm sorry, Fact Finder to Census.gov. And again, I can give you all this stuff. This is not in the PowerPoint. Okay. So anyway, let's go find out what the latest. We're at the American Community Survey, which is a survey done every year by the U.S. Census Bureau. It's done in 3 parts. Every year they have a 1-year product which deals with all municipalities and counties with more than 60,000 people. So the smaller ones are not going to be in it. The second product is what they call the 3-year product. That I think gets you down to 20. And then the 5-year product gets you down to the census tract level. That gets you to everything. Now the problem is, when you see, that means, for example, I can get 1-year data, which I'll show you here in a few minutes. I can get 1-year data very easily from, you know, major metropolitan areas, major cities, and all of that kind of thing. But if I need, as I had to do yesterday on a project, to get county data other than population for 2010, I actually have to use the 2012 5-year report, because what they do is they take a 1/5 slice of the average year. So it's a little complicated. But you see here, the American Community Survey is by far the most significant source for U.S. data, and I do all sorts of things. You can't believe the stuff I do with census data, and with Google Translate, I can deal with Arabic and all sorts of things. I mean, this is no problem, usually anyway. But you see here, we have a number of surveys. The American Community Survey, which is the survey that is done every year, a 1-year sample of 60,000 people or more. And of course it has state data as well. We have the American Housing Survey. I don't use that much, but it would be something you could look at. You have annual economic surveys, Census of Governments. This, for example, I've been very much involved and I think have been successful in killing municipal consolidation efforts in 5 states at this point. Then I do it by going into data like this and showing that, you know what, smaller governments actually spend less, you know. And that's before you consider the problems that occur when you try to consolidate them, which the left always seems to do. You see here the decennial census, taken every year, every 10 years since 1790, and so on. Now I'm going to take you to the population estimates program, because now we can find something else about the population of cities. Now notice when you go to the next screen, it gives you topics. So you go into your topics. Says people, housing, etc. Not always is what you want there, but let's just pick up basic counter estimate, which is the population. And it took me, by the way, a year to learn this system. It's unbelievable. But the census, you know, they actually gave the job for ACS to the losing bidder on the Obamacare side. But it actually works pretty well now. So anyway, let's put in civilian population. That may leave out some people. And so we now know that. Now let's go to geographies. And let's pick. You see, we got all sorts there. We got, that's interesting. They don't like that. Okay, maybe I picked the wrong one. Let's try, I don't usually use the population, oh well, I don't usually use the population estimates figure. Oh, population total, sorry about that. Okay, now we're going to be able to do it. Now we're going to go and we're going to choose to get, you want cities or metropolitan areas, or what do you want?
Well, they're creating regions, so they're combining a lot of cities
We have
together.
about 16 county region, and
Oh,
they
yeah.
estimated that 400,000 people are going to move into this region.
And what's the population now?
1 million,
Okay, and over what period of time is this supposed to happen?
40 years.
That'd be pretty tough. Maybe if you become a true suburb of
Well,
Atlanta.
especially the county I live in, our population is decreasing and has been decreasing. It's not
Right.
increasing. I don't know where they get these numbers from.
Oh, no, they have also, and this is a big deal. I mean, I did a big report on Plan Bay area, in the San Francisco area, where they actually went and project the population. They basically said, oh, we can't handle all these people, therefore we have to stack them into these small
Right.
units. And you know what? Their population was well above the official state estimates. Okay? They just ignore that.
Yes, so I'm from the Bay Area, and I've written about this,
Yeah.
and I've attended the meeting. And what they did was, you probably know this, the demographer for the Association of Bay Area Governments, Stephen Meeting,
Talk louder, please.
he changed the method. And
Of
instead
course.
of calculating the population in terms of, I'm not sure what they were calculating of, but he changed it and started calculating in terms of projected economic
Oh, yeah.
employment growth in particular. And what they did, and you're right, because about the Department of Finance, it's official, if you look at the state website, the DOF calculations are supposed to guide the projections. We're not allowed to say predictions, by the way. They're projections, forecasts. They had an emergency session, which was not noticed ahead of time. There's a great YouTube video of it online. And they hauled the demographers from DOF into the ABAG headquarters, and they sat there looking glum when they had to say, we will not contest this, even though we and ABAG and the Metropolitan Transportation Commission had worked together. They clearly, I don't know if it was illegal, but it was certainly idiosyncratic.
Well, the point is, this is what some of our speakers were talking about this morning. You know, the law does not apply to government. Now, I, in my report, picked that issue up, and I say this very simple, okay? Either the ABAG people are right, in which case the Department of Finance needs to go back and apply those same assumptions to all of the 58 counties of California. That means that, you know, and by the way, I mean, these population projections are crazy. I mean, back in the late 2000s, about 2007, Department of Finance came out with a projection that by, I think it was 2040,
It was way over.
you'd have 60 million people. I was out within a week in the Orange County where it registers saying you're going to miss by at least 10. And it's clear they will miss by that. But no, this is a terrible game. It needs to be challenged. It's arguing about the future, but the fact is, I'll tell you another reason why San Francisco isn't going to have that kind of economic growth. Places where housing costs 10 times incomes instead of 3 don't grow. But it's gotten even worse because now ABAG has come back with another report. I don't know if you've seen it. The numbers have gone up again. We're going to have in the city of San Francisco by 2040, we're going to have 1,085,000 people. Right now we have 837. No city in the history of the world that is fully developed has added that amount of population. What a lot of people don't realize is as cities get bigger, they get less dense, not more dense, because they spread out at the side.
But that's not possible in San Francisco. There's no place to spread. unless it's really
Cities by, I mean, urban area. No.
Well,
I'm
that's-
talking about the city as an urban area. And I'm saying that you are not good.
I have a problem with that, just because the figure of million is what's being bandied about.
No, I'm saying it's not going to happen.
I
Well,
know
agree,
Central,
but the question is how to challenge it on what ground.
well, you challenge it by basically saying it doesn't make sense. Unfortunately, all you can do, you can't really argue too much in terms of factual data with respect to the future. But yeah, the $1,085,000, it's not going to happen. The State Department of Finance number is 891. It may be a little low, but not much. But anyway.
But in the meantime, they've packed everybody
Right.
into these dense areas. I think that's Zelda's point. We're going down this path and we have no choice.
That's exactly the problem. It's
Yes.
going on all over the place. You have these phony projections and the planners go forward and work on those bases, and that's a big problem.
Wendell?
Yeah.
If I may just jump into the argument real quick. The basic bottom line is, if your local planning and zoning people are the ones that are planning your city, which I'm assuming they are, unless the government is taking, the federal government's
The
taking it
regions
over
are
altogether.
doing it. The regions are doing it and dictating to the cities.
Well, that's regionalization,
California, that's the law.
which you've got the Bay Area, and maybe the law, but the bottom line is, only if they zone the availability for you to go high enough to pick up 1 million people, if they don't do that, if the people come up and say, we're just not going to add any more people, then the planning and zoning people can't do it. So
But
how
they
can you
are.
project?
But they're, so.
So where do you put
Just
them?
playing off of Lavonda Atkinson's, I read about her.
So where do you put them?
No, the
Well,
point
so
is,
what's
it's,
how do you add 1 million
So
on
the
top of what's
proposal
there?
is now that the central subway is here, that changes the context for planning. This is what I heard directly from City Hall.
So it
We're going
spreads
to wipe out our blue collar.
Yep.
Soma is going to become, South of Market is to become the second high-rise, high-value, high-rent, tech-oriented downtown. And there's going to be a fight about it, actually. A big fight in the city because they just, and I'll stop at just make one point, because they stupidly targeted, it's not they, it's the planners, it's the developers, it's the landlords, the San Francisco Flower Mart, and you couldn't ask for a nicer poster child
Oh,
for,
sweet.
hey, wait a minute, we
Sweet.
need some diversity, and everybody loves flowers, and so it just happened over the summer, and they're actually, so it's not going to be a slam dunk for them, but it's going to be a hard fight because the money for the real estate industry and also in city and the planners, it's all on the side of really unbridled growth.
and the point is that with respect to the Bay Area and all of California, you now have the worst urban planning law in the
Yeah.
country under Senate Bill 375.
Yeah.
Essentially, it is going to be impossible to build single-family houses. It isn't really much is in the Bay Area, but even in Riverside, San Bernardino, and Fresno, places that are growing where the overspill of people leaving the unaffordable markets can go. So what they do is they do these little things. First of all, the regionalization thing in the Bay Area is unbelievable. Here we have a state where we had to go to a constitutional amendment on the ballot to make it possible to pass a budget in the state by less than a 2/3 vote, because you couldn't get that many votes to pass a budget in the California legislature, yet they hardly ever even have open votes at ABAG. In Los Angeles, 81, the vote on the regional transportation plan was 81-1. I would suggest to you, we have unrepresentative bodies. But what they're doing is they're also going, they've got these city councils, Orinda, places like that, and they basically say, you know, if you want transportation money from us, you're going to have to upzone. So I mean, you are very lucky in Florida that your legislature killed the Smart Growth Act 3 years ago. Because this is what these people are faced with. It's
It's not
impossible.
just if you want money, if you don't zone, it's illegal, and your city will be sued. And Pleasanton was sued, and they had to back down.
And you can count on one hand the number of cities in this country that have ever turned down money. Okay? So, I mean, that's just the...
Wendell, they're bribing us with our own money.
Of course they are. Yeah, I mean, there's no question about how bad it is. But by the way, I'm happy to keep talking, I mean, going back and forth. If you want to see demonstration here, fine, no problem. Where are we now? Any other?
Sit down so we can go home and do this.
Okay, well, here we are. I'm doing the very simple thing, but I'll move it. What we're going to do now, remember, we're looking at population estimates. Oh boy, I hope I have, you know what? Let's see here. See, this proves, okay, I've made some mistakes. Okay, let's instead say you want to know something else. This American Community Survey, for some reason the population estimates thing is not working. This is not unusual for AC estimates. Let's go to the American Community Survey. Anybody have any ideas about what you'd like to know about cities? Like, yes?
I'd like to know how much of the lower 48 is actually developed.
It's about 2-4. I'll get you the exact number.
3.4.
3.0 is the number including Alaska. I'd have to check it back, but I can see.
And a piggyback question, how much is owned by the federal and state governments?
That's easily enough found. And remember, all of your federal ownership is largely in Colorado West.
Right.
And it can be like in Nevada, I think it's 80 or 90%. Colorado, what's the number in Colorado? Do you remember, John? In Colorado, how much does the Fed own in Colorado?
I thought it was around 80%.
Yeah.
70, 80%.
Yeah, yeah. What about, any of you like to know anything about like ages or where people live in terms of types of housing?
You know what I would like to research, and I think there's a button there for taxes. I'm so tired of people not, I want to know, everybody should post on their town signs how much they paid in federal taxes. Because I'm so tired of us getting money grants back, but guess what? You know, we're getting 3 times the money back that we ever put in. You know, people don't realize that grants are federal dollars paid by somebody else. Maybe we ought to watch, you know, what we put in is what we get out, but stop over-giving to everybody.
Yeah, and that's
my
a,
zip code, you know?
yeah, that's a good point, except there's no data like that.
Yeah.
Not on this side. Yes?
Well, actually, to answer her question, the federal government gives away $600 billion a year. Now, you got to remember, if you take all of the employees of the federal government, I've heard 2 numbers, John, Anthony and I were discussing this. I've got a number of 1.85 million federal workers. John says there's something like 2.8.
It's over 2 million.
It's over 2 million. So I'll tell you what, let's roll it up to 3. Oh, there you are. All right, jump in. So let's say it's 3 million, and they average with benefits $100,000 a pop.
Are you kidding? They average with benefits more like 150.
All right, let's take 150.
No,
Wendell, I'm not going to argue with you because you're always right. Okay?
No.
So we're going to take 150. So take 150 times 3 million. We'll give them the extra bump there. What have you got? You've got $450 billion, correct? Am I close? Is anybody doing the math? Am I right on the math?
That's 3 times 15. That's good.
That's it.
Yep.
So 400
zeros may be wrong, but that's
$450 billion, all right? Now, we spend $3.7 trillion, correct? That was last year's total that we spent out. So the question then becomes, if the people that are working in federal government only make $450 billion of that, where's the rest of the money going? And when you research that, you start to drill down, you find out the federal government's got so much money, they can't get it out the front door fast enough. They have to give away, when I researched it 2 years ago, it was over $600 billion was going out the front door in grants, just what you're saying.
I attended a Silicon Valley Tax Association meeting last week, found out that the librarian in Santa Clara paid $180,000.
Sure.
Librarian. Oh my God.
Well, she's got a big
well.
job.
Wendell, can you look at, say, where the jobs are?
Yeah, well, you can't look at where you can look up, yeah, sure. What we can do, we can look up the number of jobs that exist in each city. Within, you can do at the zip code level, but we don't want to do that. That's a little bit too complicated. But let's go back here. We've now got I'll put in all places in the United States, which will not be that many. And then I'll go back and we'll look at work trip market share at the work location. Now you see here, now what I've been doing here, you see we have topics, we have geographies. And geographies is where you choose what you want. You can choose all counties or you can choose Palm Beach County, whatever you like. And the topics, you see all of them here. Now let's go to employment. Now under employment, you see we have various things, benefits, class of worker, commuting. This is your normal work trip market share at the residence location. But down here you see place of work, and this is what I love, except it's not as complete as the other, and that's where people work and how they get to work. So let's look at that. Now, and now let me see here, I need to find, we go down, oh, let's see here. Strange thing about this program, let's see, it's 84006 here, okay, 8406, you see sex of workers by means of transportation to work for workplace geographies. In other words, for where they work, not where they live, which is, from a transit perspective, the only thing that counts. I mean, if you don't have a concentration of destinations, you don't have any transit ridership. Now, here we have some, well, I'll leave it on this rather than, you can see up here, I can download the whole file as an Excel file, but it may be easier to read here. We see here Birmingham, Alabama. We have 189,000 jobs in the city. 164,000 of those people who went to work traveled there by car, by driving alone. Driving alone. Carpooling was 17,000. Transit's overcrowded at 2,700. You see, bicycling has really taken off there. Walking. And the other thing, by the way, that a lot of people don't realize, working at home. You know that working at home, take Portland, for example. I grew up in Portland, so I can disparage it all I want. Portland built light rail in the 1980s, about early 1980s. At that point, the Portland metropolitan area had 8.4% of its employees went to work by transit. Today, it's 6% after 5 light rail lines. Back in 1980, I think it was 3% of the people worked at home. Today, more people work at home in Portland than use transit. 37 of the 52 largest metropolitan areas in the country, more people ride work at home than ride transit. Or you can look at Denver, where John Caldera fell on his sword to deliver the light rail system, as I recall. John was on the board of directors at RTD. He successfully fought off a terrible funding program back, was it 97?
97, how do you remember that?
I knew it was somewhere in that area. And they were going to build this big rail system. Then John goes off the board. One term on an RTD board is all anybody that has any self-confidence would want to do. So then he goes to the Independence Institute. Then they come back at him with a lot more money. They pass the thing. The result, and a good friend of mine and John is Cal Marcella, who used to be the general manager. I even did some work for John, or for Cal. And I called Cal and I said, you're going to be taken to the cleaners. You can't do this for that. Oh, yeah, no, it's going to be okay. Well, it's so bad that even the Denver Post, and the only major metropolitan area, major paper in the country that has come out and said, we spent too much money. Now, meanwhile, how many light rail lines do we have now? 5, is it? 4?
Something like that.
So, okay, let's say we got 5 light rail
They
lines.
cut the commuter rail in order to save it. The commuter rail to Boulder and Longmont is now...
Oh, isn't that amazing how that happens? So, okay, we go back to 1990, and by the way, before John ran this town, I did. In the late 80s, I worked with later Governor Bill Owen and State Senator Terry Considine to write the privatization law for transit in Denver. What we did then is we said 20% of the system's got to be privatized. Actually, Terry and I, the senator, were called in by the governor because we had the votes, at least in one house, and the governor said, listen, I'll give you 20%, you can't have the 100 you want. And Terry said, what do you do? I said, you take it, we need this thing. Well, what's happened now is it's up to over 50%.
Only 50%, they've limited it now.
Okay, yeah, now they've limited it, but still, 50% of the Denver system is competitively contracted. And mind you, the savings, in fact, Randall and I were in a meeting a year ago, in which Randall said, well, yeah, but what did they do with the savings? They built light rail. I said, well, you know what? I'd rather have light rail and more bus service than only have bus service with the fare, with the cost going up. But the basic point is, it's been an incredible success. Literally billions have been saved here. And I thought this is such a good idea. I mean, the whole transit system, all of the buses in London, 6,000 buses are contracted out. The savings are about 50% from what they were before on an inflation-adjusted basis.
How do they save the money? Is it because the privates...
Because they actually pay market.
Because the privates are not unionized? Is that...
No, it has nothing to do with unionization.
Well,
No. Union drivers do not make muni salaries. You go to the unionized organizations in San Francisco that provide charter bus service, they don't pay anything like that. Usually the union, this is why, and I'm no friend of unions, it's not unions, it is monopoly that is the problem. So, you go around, I can remember when I was doing some research.
We had that example in the Seattle area, that Snohomish County Transit contracts out about 30% of their bus service.
Right.
And the drivers are of the same union under different contracts. But they claim that they have a reduced operating cost on the services that are contracted out. I don't know the number of how much lower, but they feel good about their contracted out.
In Denver, it was work rules that the in-house, you had to pay for a full day. You had drives a bus in, and then a bus cleaner would come in to clean up the bus, and then a separate person would come in to fix the light bulb, whereas in the private contractors, one person would do all those things. And according to Cal, that savings from the contracting has been bonded in order to keep doing.
Yeah, and I realize
So
this.
now he claims it can't be done.
And by the way, that's probably true, but I was naive enough to think, see, I was appointed to the LA County Transportation Commission in 1977 by Tom Bradley. I was a Democrat then. Within 30 days, I was a Republican. Seriously. It's unbelievable. But in any event, I really believe in public service. I think we need to put out as much transit service as we can for the money we're prepared to spend. And I have no qualms about saying if we were getting market rate costs, we could double transit service in this country tomorrow. So I was of this view, if only they see it in operation, the whole country will come for it. And so we do it in Denver. It was incredibly successful. Even though the bureaucracy tried to claim there were no savings, we were able to throw out the study and get it done right. It hasn't been copied anywhere. It scares the you-know-what out of the other transit agencies. Now, happens that San Diego has about 50% of their service contracted out, very successful there. And in LA, where I was, we have all sorts of smaller services that are contracted out. But it's been a very successful thing. And by the way, Copenhagen, as I mentioned, London, Perth, Australia, Melbourne, Australia, the EU actually, the European Union actually passed a regulation requiring competitive contracting of all transit service in Europe, and it was eventually killed by places like Paris Metro and the big transit agencies that got to their national governments to kill it. But anyway, that's a little off the subject, sorry.
Could you talk a little bit about geospatial data? I'm asking because HUD has written a new AFFH rule, affirmatively furthering fair housing, and part of this rule is that the communities will receive massive amounts of this kind of geospatial data that contains all sorts of information. And the communities, the local governments then have to accept this data. They cannot question the data, and they have to base their local decisions about, for example, where to put affordable housing projects on this data. So where does HUD get all this data from? How precise is it? How does the local government know it's even correct?
Well, I don't know I haven't been involved in that, but I'm a bit familiar with the whole HUD attempt under the Obama administration, and one can only hope that that's going to be blocked either by court decisions or by a change in the administration. This is very threatening stuff. Yeah, can you, Ann?
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I've been in the GIS industry, and I don't trust any of me as a vendor, and I don't trust much of that data, because sources.
Where could you go then to find that information?
I'm sorry, I don't understand what she was asking. What kind of data?
It's called geospatial data. Geographic spatial data. And it's all sorts of data. It's, for example, it's population, it's demographic data. But then what kind of people live in which distance to what? Public libraries, swimming pools, public transportation, schools, shops, everything. It's going to be huge amounts of data. There's never been anything like it before. And this data is going to come from HUD, and some of it comes from the census, but a lot of this data I don't think has that ever been collected before on that scale?
Well, most cities have a good GIS system, and they've collected data for 30 years, 40 years now. So I'm not sure.
Well, I would be very concerned about the data. First of all, to the extent that it's from census, fine. This work that I'm doing up here, where we're breaking up cities and saying that we're not using jurisdictions anymore, we're basically saying, an urban core is something that looks like this. That's all done at the zip code level. I would be doing it at the census tract level, except with zip code data, I can have a complete file of any data I want down in 3 minutes off this site. And if I use census tract, I've got to find somebody to make 50 downloads. If they'd make it available at the census tract level, it'd take me 8 minutes. I could deal with that. The point is, the census data for a lot of things is really pretty good. My concern has to do with all this left-wing funded stuff on stuff like this awful housing and transportation index, which is an absolute fraud. A bunch of left-wing organizations are out there doing these kinds of things, and I'll have to look into this. But I think you're right to be concerned about that. And, you know, you combine with that, doubtless they're going to want to get into walkability, you know, and all sorts of things like that, because none of us wants to drive our car anymore, you know.
Just a suggestion, if you go to a, whatever is probably a national mailing house, what I mean by a mailing house is that if you were doing brochures and you're going to send them out, and you wanted those brochures to go to a specific identified market, say like children, or families who have children between the ages of kindergarten and 5th grade if you're opening up a school, those mailing houses can skinny down those lists to that specific. So if they can do that, maybe they have the geo information you're looking for, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to ask you on the Met Council 2040 plan.
Right.
Right now, we are busier planning single-family homes. No one wants to actually, we're forced to plan multi-family in the Met Council. And they can't sell that. No one wants to build it. And yet the Met Council 2040 plan says no one wants single-family homes, so it's no more new single-family homes. You just buy a lot, rebuild a home if you want a new home. Where do they get that data?
Oh, the leading researcher on this is a guy by the name of Chris Nelson, who's now at the University of Arizona. Chris has done this all over the country. He imagines that people want to live in smaller houses and wants to live in multifamily dwellings. Dealing with, and by the way, I know Chris, and I've debated him 5 or 6 times, and he's a really nice guy, but we disagree violently. Well, violently is the wrong word, but it's substantially on this. Yeah. But this is what they're doing, and you can look the new urbanist people and the smart growthers are all out there saying all the millennials are moving to the city, and so we have Denver. Oh, we got to bring millennials in. You got Minneapolis, St. Paul. Let's bring them. There isn't a city I know of that doesn't think that millennials are the key to the future. You want to know what city has had the largest growth, by city I mean metropolitan area, and had the largest growth in millennials in the last 10 years in the United States? A city that just turned down a streetcar. A city that has rejected light rail over and over again, and hardly a highly ranked city in terms of status among urban planners. It's called San Antonio, okay? Denver ranks 7th, and Denver's the first in city. Seattle, I think, is 9th, and so on. So these guys make this stuff up. They really do. They go out with these surveys. Would you prefer a smaller house if the commute were shorter? Well, most people, a lot of people would say that. But what they don't realize, they are working in this monocentric model where they presume that everybody in Miami works down by the Dade County Courthouse or somewhere else downtown. And the fact is that the Brookings Institution has done a report 5 years ago in which they said, let's go into all the major metropolitan areas of the United States and identify how many jobs you can get to in a period of time by transit. Let's take 45 minutes, because nobody would have dared look at 30. 8% is the number. Now take Portland, my favorite place. In Portland, the number is actually 6% of the people in Portland can get you can get to 6% of the jobs if you're the average employee. You want to know about cars? 100% in 30 minutes, and that's at rush hour.
Yeah, I just heard Bruce Katz last week speaking at a San Francisco Chamber of Commerce / Wells Fargo, what was it called? Forecast SF 2014. You know, he's the head of this.
Yeah, Metropolitan Studies.
Right.
I love using his data when he's right.
Oh, and he's just championing every single cliche in the smart growth book: walkability, innovation, disruption. I can go on and on and on. And it's all the rise of innovation district was what he was talking about. So I don't know, maybe there's a little contradiction there, the Brookings Institution.
Oh yeah, no, the point is that, listen, first of all, the Brookings Institution is a good organization, and usually when they research, it's straight. The problem is when they ask the wrong question. I think I've probably killed them on 2 surveys. One, you don't see this survey being updated any, because I can't write about transit without. My first article on it was called Transit, the 4% Solution, because I basically did a regression and said, well, if it's 6% or 8%, I'm sorry, at 45 minutes, what would it be in 30 minutes? And then the other one was on this stuff, you saw my point about Bridgeport. They came out with a report in 2012 saying, here are the most affluent cities in the world. And they buried the numbers, but they didn't bury them enough for me. Because if it's on the internet, I can find it. I don't care how you do it. And they haven't republished that. But I use every opportunity I can to talk about how Bridgeport, Hartford, only slightly more dense than Atlanta, is the most productive city in the world. So, you had a point?
I was just going to make it fundamental. We've been dealing with growth management and its implementation in the Seattle area for over 20 years. And it's largely driven by trying, first, two reasons. One, you want to lock up as much land as possible and not allow people to use it. And it's successfully done that. And we have an urban growth boundary now that says all the growth needs to be accommodated inside that boundary. And there's a factor they use, it's called the market factor. So, I mean, the good news is we have to plan to accommodate growth. We have a question about population growth. The bad news is that we're doing a terrible job of it. There's a tool they use called an assumption in the modeling for how much capacity we have in our land based on the zoning. And then they apply a market factor 4 times to that. Some of us have been working on this, believe that market factor is half of what it should be.
Yeah.
In other words, if you get into these things, it should be you should have 7 or 8 times the theoretical zone capacity for your housing supply than you actually need for the next 10 or next 20 years for a functional market to happen. In other words, you see these horrific effects on housing affordability, which we are a poster child for. The other thing is that this density, and essentially transit, when you boil it down, its promoters measure its success by 2 basic factors. One is that it exists.
That's right.
You got to have light rail to be a world-class city.
Right.
Before we had light rail in Seattle, I looked at it and said, well, what's the congestion like in the cities that have invested in light rail? And sure enough, 15 out of 16 cities ahead of us have invested in light rail, the worst congestion. That's a good way to increase your congestion. The other one, so does transit exist, and does it reach some artificially chosen or arbitrarily chosen level of ridership? And those are the 2 metrics, and that's the end of it. I think what we need to do is say that's not good enough. We really need to start messaging that what are the cost benefits of blowing your money on a $4 billion light rail extension, or what if you put that into bus rapid transit, or what if you did it as an alternative to expand the general purpose capacity of your urban freeways. So these are some of the little things we've learned in this. When you're trying to understand the motivation of it, it does boil down to those measures of success on transit are just not good enough. They don't get us where we are. And I think you're going to see some of these, when we talk about the Sack-a-Shacks that was sung about last night, we're seeing apartments, which are these micro apartments now. And it is
apartments.
About 300 square foot apartments.
Yeah, and you're right. The only thing I would suggest here is if you guys in Seattle are actually looking at patronage and making some judgment of it, you are way ahead of everybody else in the country. Because just building the system is enough elsewhere. Nobody, how many people in Denver are aware of the fact that you're carrying a smaller share of the workers to work in Denver than you were in 1990? Nobody knows. I mentioned this on your program the other night, but yeah.
And then Seattle went down from 6% to 3.8%.
Well, and then you take Atlanta. Atlanta with the best subway built outside Washington in the last 40 years, it's down to 3.2% work trip market share. Seattle's 9%. And Portland's 6%, and Atlanta with the best subway system is at 3.2%. But the other thing, your great point on that market issue with respect to the urban growth boundary. Yes, your housing costs, your median house price relative to median household income is 5.3 according to our latest report. Should be 3, and it was there in the 1990s before our dear friend from Island County came in with the Growth Management Act. The basic point is, though, I would argue for a slightly different thing to think about. Rather, and I'm glad to see you using multiples to try to figure out how much land you need. You determine if you have enough land when the prices are where they should be, not on some academic theory.
Well, actually, so we do have that. The State Growth Management Act prescribes it as a plan to accommodate growth, which is actually very fine. Then in counties, they have the next level is county-wide planning policies. In King County, they were 50-some pages,
And they have these, for housing affordability, actually their appendices 2, which says you have to have enough housing supply, and you measure against that, and then you also have to have appendix 3, is your housing needs to be affordable within 3 different ranges. So we actually have that in law, that we are supposed to be planning, and our plans need to meet these requirements. But it's like the previous session, they're just not applying the law.
Well, the point is you need to identify a standard. In this nation, until the coming of growth management, all metropolitan areas, including San Francisco, had a median multiple of 3 or less. By that I mean median household income, median house price divided by median household income. San Francisco prices started exploding when the growth management stuff started coming into smaller cities in the early 1970s. You need to identify the number that represents the appropriate house price that, if extended throughout the metropolitan area, would give you a median multiple of 3.
So that's an additional fact measurement.
Yeah, because there's a big problem there. In the long run, Seattle's a wonderful place. In fact, I can't think of an American city I'd rather live in. If you'd move it 1,500 miles further east, I'd live there.
Like home.
Yeah, well, it's really a great place. But you know, Seattle's doing well. Seattle didn't do that well in the last 10 years, in the last census period, but they're doing well in domestic migration now. But why? Because California is so expensive, it's unbelievable. There are all sorts of studies out there that are telling us now that migration is being driven in this country by housing affordability. Now, if you moved to Los Angeles from Cleveland, following the Wrens in 1944, and you decided, you know, it's just gotten too expensive here and I want to cash out, you're not going back to Cleveland. You may go to Seattle, you may go to Denver, you may go to Portland. But the fact is, in the long run, your 5.3 at the moment is on the way to 9. And when you consider what's going on at the moment with respect to the Chinese purchases in the market and in California as well, there's no getting out of this unless if you can figure out a way to make the Growth Management Act work by providing enough land. I don't care whether there's an urban growth boundary. If the urban growth boundary is at the Canadian border, I'm happy.
Well, my friend was a legislator. When the legislature passed the Growth Management Act, he told me the intent was that the urban growth boundary would be somewhere east of North Bend. Which is
right.
It's not quite the Canadian border, but it's a long ways out.
Yeah.
They drew it in and actually were about to exclude some 1970s suburban development from that. One last thing on this is that the prime motivation was that we were pushing for more money for roads because our roads, our highways, and others were beginning to get chronically congested. Rather than just an incident, you would constantly count on it was going to be, you're going to have rush hour. So we were pushing to get the money invested in roads. A little known provision in this growth management was that you cannot build urban infrastructure outside the urban growth boundary. In the rural side, you cannot put in a curb, a gutter, a sidewalk. You cannot connect to a sewer line. You cannot use municipal water. So then they came in and cranked down and said the sewer septic standards are so high you can't meet them. They cranked down, instead of 500 gallons a day from your well, you can only get 500, et cetera, et cetera. So it was a hidden effort we weren't aware of at the time, but essentially and then it's again to get the voters, the populace, to eventually spring for more taxes for transit.
Yeah. I've missed a couple of people. You had something?
Well, I was going to ask it. So, it's not just growth management, is it? It's also people, the Chinese, certainly that's true.
No.
Let me finish my statement. And it's perhaps not fair to keep talking so much about Seattle and San Francisco, because a lot of places aren't like Seattle and San Francisco in terms of being crazy, but that's where I'm from. So that's what we're talking about. So let me ask you a question I put to Jed Kolko, who's the chief economist of Trulia, which he could not answer. How much growth then would it take? How many new housing units in the city to bring down the price of housing to which you would consider reasonable?
Are you talking about the city of San Francisco?
Yes, I am. And
no.
He said he had no idea, in fact.
Well, no, I would say there is no answer. This gets us back
to the... that's a problem if there's no
No, it's not a problem because it comes... Well, I realize that. But you think about what is a city. A city is a metropolitan area. The labor market of San Francisco is defined by the U.S. Census Bureau as 4 counties, the San Francisco metropolitan area. We measure housing affordability at that level. We expect this to happen in terms of house prices. But if you lower on the outside, the house prices are going to come down, but you're never going to see a 3.0 multiple in the city of San Francisco.
No, you're not. And so there's a factor here that you're not considering. Maybe that's because you're a demographer and you're looking at this in terms of statistics. And that's the quality of life and the character of the place. In order to, well, I understand that the economist of San Francisco has said, I haven't seen the report, but I heard it from someone who's reputable and reliable, 100,000 new units. I think it's 100. That ain't going to happen. And if it did happen, San Francisco would be like Shanghai. I don't want San Francisco.
No, actually, Shanghai's much nicer. You get beyond the core. Shanghai's just fine.
I don't even live in San Francisco, but I was born there.
Yeah, but no,
I'm
it
a
is.
Bay Area native, and I care about it. I don't want to live in a place with that kind of density, and that's one thing. And there's one other point I want to make to this story. The building, we all know about. There were 4 lawsuits at Planned Bay Area. 2 of them failed. And that's from this side of the aisle. Sierra Club environmentalist sued, they won. So did the Building Industry Association of the Bay Area, and they won as well. And they won and they have refused. I've tried to get the information from ABAG. I'm a reporter, they won't give it to me. In the settlement, they are going to recalculate housing. They're going to allow more housing to be built in the burbs. There's no formula, there are no details, but that was the deal that they struck in order not to lose that lawsuit.
Good.
And I'm saying they being MTC but that's just a side point. My larger point is I have problems with growth after a certain point, and it has because of the quality of life and the character of the place. And I think that needs to be taken into consideration as well. And I haven't heard a whole lot about that.
No, the point is if you allow the growth to occur on the fringe, you don't need a San Francisco with 1 million people. And I mean, you have less traffic congestion, it spreads out. We still only cover about 6 or 7% of the state with urbanization. But anyway, I need to get to you, yes?
You said something that struck me. I'm from the Bay Area as well.
Yeah.
And you said that statistically, I think that the job market in the Bay Area is considered 4 counties. Did you say that?
That's right. That's
so
the metropolitan
I want to
area.
know what those 4 counties are, because Planned Bay Area is 9 counties and 101 cities, and we've got a whole bunch of counties towards the north like Napa, Sonoma, that they're all very rural counties, and they're urbanizing. They're forcing these urban growth boundaries on these tiny little towns, and they want to Manhattanize even these tiny towns. I mean, so it's one issue in San Francisco, but they're forcing this crap throughout, throughout the whole Bay Area.
Well, and you're right, and by the way, I can count it's 5 counties. San Francisco, San Mateo, Alameda, Contra Costa, and Marin. Now, here's the problem though. The ABAG, I believe, and I may not be completely sure of this, San Francisco has a strange situation where the MPO, the Metropolitan Planning Organization, I think is the MTC.
Yes.
Okay, so the MTC is a creation of state law. So there's your problem. The MTC has the 9, is it the 9-county jurisdiction?
9 counties, yeah.
Right, now by the way, that area is almost the same as what's called the CSA, that I did not talk to you about, called the Consolidated Metropolitan, the Combined Metropolitan Statistical Area, and that includes San Benito, and Santa Clara. I can't remember if Santa Cruz is involved, but that's where you get essentially the ABAG. But ABAG is either a voluntary organization of municipalities and counties in the Bay Area, or it may have also been imposed on you by state law. I don't know. I've never really understood the difference between those two, though they run in lockstep.
Voluntary Corte Madera. One city actually dropped out.
Well, thank God. Well, and they should. You all in the Bay Area should be trying to get everybody to drop out.
Amen.
Yeah, yes, sir.
Yeah, I would. Okay, so as we're fighting some of these attempts at regionalism, and I'm looking at a couple of them. Up in Envision Lehigh Valley, up in the Pennsylvania area, Thrive 2055 down in Tennessee, Georgia and Alabama. So some of the planks in our platform here talk about the cost of housing as a multiple of income. Great way to go. Talking about excessive cost of light rail and the inefficiency of the transport. We're not getting very many people writing this stuff. Unelected councils, right? Okay, but now something that really registers with people, particularly in Polk County and parts of Bradley County, outside of Chattanooga, part of this 16 county area, are zoning regulations. Now you go to the planners and they say, oh, there's not a problem, there are not going to be any zoning regulations. There's not going to be any unelected officials either. It's not even going to be a board. In fact, we're not even going to have a plan. So that's what we're fighting
That's what
about.
you're telling
And
us.
obviously, all these things are going to come about. But we want to nip this before it gets any further than it is. So what's the argument that we can create about zoning regulations? Because these farmers, they like the idea of all this fancy stuff coming into their neighborhood. They think planning, why not? That sounds reasonable. But they don't want anybody messing, they don't want any zoning regulations.
Well, I mean, you look at success. Let's go to Texas. And by the way that Texas is zoned is how the nation was zoned up till about 1970.
Okay.
Counties, for the most part, didn't have zoning authority. Essentially in Texas, and this is one of the great things that's kept Texas affordable. You know, one of the reasons that Texas is now adding more people to its population every year than California is because of its housing affordability. Now, the city of Houston is famous for not having zoning, but that's an anomaly. In Texas, of course, like most states, you have incorporated areas that are cities within the counties, and then you have rural areas or unincorporated areas. It is illegal to zone for a county in Texas. All you have to do is comply with existing environmental regulation, and it's not hard. So that builders tell me they can sometimes go from approval to people moving in 9 months. I'll bet that hasn't happened in a long time in San Francisco or Seattle. So again, Randall's exactly right when he basically talks about getting rid of planning. Now, it's not a very popular thing to do, but there are other places throughout the Midwest where you have this kind of situation as well, and they've remained affordable. And the neat thing about it, take a look at Austin, for example. City of Austin is as left-wing as it can be. If it were in Wisconsin, we would call it Madison. But Austin is in a metropolitan area with cities on the outside and unincorporated territory. And these cities on the outside have no use for the smart growth policies of Austin. Well, you know what? Austin has to compete. If Austin wants to have smart growth, it had better do it in a way that doesn't mess up its housing market. So I would urge you to develop arguments against zoning. Why do you need it? What is the problem we're trying to solve? You know. So anyway, yes.
Just on housing affordability issue, we're seeing a rapid appreciation in home prices and within the shadow of spacing.
Right.
And we're not the phenomenon of Amazon. Things would be very different in the Seattle area economically. But my question is, since interest rates are 3 percentage points lower than they were before the housing market crashed, and that effectively increases your purchasing power, your qualifying income to purchase by 30%, therefore driving up, that has a significant impact on people who have these incomes to pay for homes. How's this going to sort out? I mean, it looks like the housing market has come back with a vengeance, but it's because of those interest rates being as low as they are. How will that
Well,
play out over time?
if we assume that interest rates will again move to reasonable levels, it's going to be devastating. You can have all sorts of people. Well, actually, not bad here compared to Canada. You know, in Canada, you get a mortgage on your house, and it's a 5 or 10-year mortgage, and then it's reset. If you got a 30-year mortgage in this country, you at least are locked in. But that means the people that buy the house next door are going to be faced with a 6 or 7% interest. That's a huge issue, though.
I mean, if somebody's paying 1.6 now for the house, but 3 years down the road, interest rates are back at 7%. You can't sell.
That's right. Yeah, it's a real problem. You know.
So what do you think is going to happen to the housing market if all of a sudden interest rates increase and the dollar begins to get from the
Well, it's going to put a lot. No, it could stem the increase in some places. In fact, it could even start things to go down. I think, though, in smart growth markets, it's not going to make much sense, much difference. You can still, it may stay the same, go down a little, go up. But by the way, I mean, in the Bay Area, and I hate to keep talking about the Bay Area, you guys, by the way, have, I think, in the Miami metropolitan area, which goes from Palm Beach County to Dade, I believe that you are the lowest per household income in the country, according to data coming out of the ACS the other day, and your median multiple is 7.6, I think it is. Terrible, absolutely terrible. But recognize that in Hong Kong, the median multiple is 15, okay? You can go much higher. I think San Francisco's on the way up. I mean, San Francisco's median multiple is almost at, San Francisco last year was 9.2, it hit 10.6, I think, during the bubble. So it's on the way up. San Jose is almost as bad. So these places have only way to do, it's a ratchet effect in Seattle and places, Portland as well. The only thing that saves Portland, you know, at least the leaders of Clark County across the river are rational enough to try to figure out how to make the growth management law not quite as bad as your people have made it in Seattle.
But I think you said once you multiple of 10, it begins to stifle housing.
No, it happens long before that. You can see the economic studies are basically showing that that intercity migration is being affected just by, you know, you get a 1 or 2 point difference, you're going to impact those things. Yeah. Yeah, if you want to stop the growth in Texas, impose growth management and get Seattle meeting in multiples, because all of us in the world having a choice between Texas and Seattle at the same housing price are going to want to go to Seattle.
Well, you know, what the hell. Any other?
So
yes, there it is.
Well, so some of these comments about, you know, the growth and the planning and why we have it, I certainly don't have a solution, but just my observation of the sort of the anxiety people have about a future without planning, it deals with sort of the human need for predictability and security. So if we can demonstrate that there's a less regulatory way to allow for cities to grow without, you know, because that's essentially what the planning scheme is all about. It's about a promise, a false promise, that we can give you a predictable future where you won't be surprised with Shanghai-style high-rises, and you won't be this and all that stuff. And so, you know, I think part of what we need to do with this data is craft it with a language that I think appeals to some of people's anxieties.
I like it. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think that's an important idea, but my experience in Minneapolis, where all of this stuff is beginning to bubble up very, very big time, is that people don't want planning. The average person doesn't think about planning at all. Has no idea that this kind of planning is going on. There has been a very skewed debate among decision makers, that is Chamber of Commerce people, the business community, etc., where they hear only the side of our Metropolitan Council. We had a study by Chris Nelson. Did you know that, Rick? Yeah, Chris Nelson, the man from Utah that Wendell.
Oh, he's now from Arizona.
Arizona, yeah, okay, now he's from Arizona. He did a study which was trumpeted in the Star Tribune newspaper, apparently saying that there would be no need for single-family homes at all before 2040.
Right, that's what.
And he says that we must return to the, quote, streetcar era. You know, 100 years ago, with their tighter live-work-shop network, that this is the direction of progress. But the ordinary person, I think, has no sense that we need planning and predictability and basically trust the market, which put Minneapolis-St. Paul where it is in terms of economic success. And Wendell, when you visited, you pointed that out. In the Midwest, we've been phenomenally successful.
Incredible.
Without any kind of planning, Metropolitan Council, until very recently. So
well, I could tell you the individual cities I work with, I have never heard anything complimentary about the Met Council.
Right.
And they're the ones that put the urban boundary that made our leapfrog city so, you know, functional.
Exactly the opposite effect that it was
But
supposed to
there's
have.
other things also that make you aware, Wendell, you know, because I don't write anything in North Dakota because I'd like to, but it would hurt my business.
Yeah, right.
What about, there's areas that are look like surprising, like Lake Charles, Louisiana, it's got explosive growth. It wouldn't be on any radar because it's just all of a sudden, it's driven by oil refineries. We're doing so much business down there, it's incredible. Prices haven't gotten out of control yet like North Dakota, but they're on their way there. But if they do things right, now they create a situation where that area gets functional, maybe, and then can draw businesses from other areas because they're going to be, the growth is going to be close. So
Yeah.
it's these little mini things they have.
Well, and one of the things you mentioned about this idea of this live-work stuff and streetcar city and so on. Former principal planner of the World Bank, Alain Berthaud, one of the best urban planners and highest ranking in the world in history, is in the process of writing a new book, and he's putting out chapters on it. And he reminds us that metropolitan areas are labor markets. And when you start balkanizing them and trying to basically plan so that people are going to work near home, you destroy the economic growth of that metropolitan area. And by the way, all of the research says this. Sir Peter Hall, who died a month ago, who's the leading urbanologist in the world, has documented how Stockholm tried to build these peripheral cities out on the rail lines. They're now all filled up with immigrants. The Swedes have moved to the suburbs. There is no success in England. After the war, after World War II, they built all sorts of new towns around London and other places. Their view was people are going to live and work in these towns. Now, they were on the periphery of London, just outside the Greenbelt. You know that the latest census shows that the average work trip length in the new towns is longer than the diameter, than the diameter of the trips. In other words, when people, I don't care what you do, you cannot plan for where people are going to work. If somebody down in Scott County on the south end of Minneapolis-St. Paul gets a good job up in Anoka County, they're going to take that job. And that's what the planners don't understand. But I'm sorry, you...
I just had a note for, who is this who wrote this, who was talking about...
Arthur C. or Chris...
Arthur C. Nelson.
So, the equation of streetcar suburbs with live-work is bizarre to me, because I live in Berkeley, which is a streetcar suburb. It's a classic streetcar suburb. It's a very desirable, but it's another place for prices. But it's all single-family homes practically. That's what the streetcar suburbs were about. And people were moving out and then commuting back into wherever they were going. That's just a complete...
But recognize what Chris has said here. This is the same thing he said in a national report in the mid-2000s. He basically said, we're overstocked with respect to single-family houses. We don't need any more. Now, here's the logic. Nobody wants a single-family house. Therefore, let's prohibit it. Now, if nobody wants a single-family house, why do we need to prohibit it? Yes?
I have two comments. One is that even though technically or legally zoning is supposed to be done by the local cities, the way it's happening in the Bay Area, and with all of these regional plans, is effectively the zoning is being done by these regional entities. Exactly. Even though they will tell you it's local control, that's a bunch of baloney. They're using the power of the purse to control what gets developed in these regions. The other thing is, in a very liberal area in the Bay Area, Marin County, the thing that really got people pissed off was they saw this high-rise apartment building. It was called WinCup, and that's why Corte Madera withdrew from ABAG. And once they saw WinCup, you wouldn't believe they have 700 people showing up at these planning meetings because they saw the effects. But most people still are not awake about that. And I think one of the problems that we have, one of the challenges that we have, is that all the media is focused with the BS message that is incorrect. And how do we get the word out to people? Because once people know, they do care because it affects their community.
Yeah. Yes.
The issue of zoning is just, again, especially implementation.
I know.
We're going to have zoning. The question is, is it going to be good zoning or bad zoning? And to Mayor Brady's point, the fight that I've been fighting for the last 25 years is on commercial zoning, where it gets so restrictive that, one council member joked that we allow you to sell brown shoes but not black shoes.
Right.
So we get into this permitted use thing, and we can't lease vacant spaces to businesses that want to be there or start a business because they're not deemed permissible. There's a solution to it, and Ed, I think you tipped it. There's some community standards that we're trying to meet. We need to be efficient about and explicit about what are those community standards, and write that into the code. And then as opposed to implying that they are and having these very restrictive terms like that. And if you're in this little zoning district and you're this type of business and there's a P in the box, you can get a business license and actually operate in this city. But implicit in those is that they meet community standards. My suggestion is be explicit about the community standards, gain majority acceptance of that, and then as long as it doesn't really matter if you're selling brown shoes or black shoes or hair products or whatever it is, and if you're a Christian bookstore and you sell a cross, that's furniture. You're not allowed to sell furniture, so you can't do that. Trust me, this is what it's like. My suggestion, and this is something I'd like to see a movement on, is let's take those overly restrictive codes, take the good part out of it, what are the community standards we're trying to meet, and then let the free market work much more effectively. And this is one tool we could do city by city that would then help our economy start to grow.
Yeah. Can I piggyback on that? I know she's had her hand up, but piggyback on that real quick. That's the next thing we're working on at our city. Right now, we've just gone through an election, and we're also fighting a refinance of a bond issue they want to do. Port St. Lucie, Florida.
Oh, thank you.
But after that, after the smoke clears there, because we only get 3 minutes at the podium, but after the smoke clears there, we're going into the ordinances of the city. And we're going to review all the ordinances of the city and find out which ones are so old or so out of date or so restrictive to our businesses, because the politicians keep crying about, we need more businesses, we need more businesses. Well, small businesses come, and the few that are able to open up come into our city council meetings and say, it's pretty tough to do business in this city. So the businesses can't go in and make the argument to get rid of all this garbage. But if you have an active group, like in our case it's AC for PR, if you have an active group that goes in there and leads for the businesses, goes and does the homework, then you can start chopping away at it. Because basically businesses can't go in there. So they need that surrogate to go in, do the review, and pin these people down and keep calling about, we need more businesses or we need more jobs. Well, they're restricting them. You'll always hear that, hey, we're going to fast track it, make it easier for people to get, how many times have you heard a politician tell you that?
So I want to widen the lens. One of my big problems with smart growth and new urbanism is that it does not, those movements, whatever you want to call them, they don't look at industrial businesses, industrial enterprise. And this is something, I was on the Planning Commission in Berkeley for 7 years and I got an education about this. Berkeley, believe it or not, still has an industrial sector. It was there way before the university is there, and it's still there. Oh yeah, 6 or 7,000. Well, sorry, then you just are not dealing with reality. Now, the problem is that land is cheap, relatively speaking. It has to be cheap because those businesses cannot afford rents, residential, office, forget it. They're not going to be there. So if you want, this is a time when you really, situation where you really need zoning. If you want to have an industrial economy in your city, especially in a hot market, you have to zone for it. And you have to enforce for it. And having zoning isn't enough, you have to enforce it. So I've been involved in fights in Berkeley, pretty much given up on Berkeley, although we did win the last one big time. But now I'm in San Francisco. I'm not moving there, but I write about it. And same situation, San Francisco still has no heavy industry. We're not talking auto plants. We're talking light industrial businesses that are essential to the drivers, the major economic drivers, the hotels, the tourism, the medical industry. And they provide, and also even auto repair shops. They're not beautiful. When we were on the bus tour yesterday, the architect came on and talked us about Boulder Junction, and he kept referring to those scruffy industrial businesses. Right, dude. They're not beautiful. You're an architect. You want everything to be pretty. Not everything has to be pretty. Let's talk about an essential aspect of the American economy, which is shrinking, which is manufacturing. And in this case, it's small scale, but it's important. And actually, the manufacturing, boutique manufacturing, don't get me started, but it's growing hugely in the city. So that to me is one place where you have to have zoning, because if you don't, and the problem in the city is that the planning department is completely in bed with the real estate industry. They're juicing the speculative frenzy, and the plan that's attending the central subway that Lavonda Atkinson was talking about is going to wipe out all the zoning south of Market, and then, yeah, we're going to lose a couple thousand blue-collar jobs. We don't care. I'm just putting it out there, and it's problematic to me and somewhat disappointing to find this conference adopting that same, you know, I don't know what to me it's always been, it's the educated classes. I have a lot of education myself. I only learned to appreciate that connection between zoning and industrial economy we've got on the Planning Commission. We don't deal with it anymore. Educated people think working with your hands, production, you know, that's for stupid people. That is a big mistake. And it's a big mistake for this entire country, not just for Berkeley or San Francisco for the economy. End of lecture. But I had to put in, I have to say something about zoning and industrial. You know, when you have that kind of differential between the rents that you're going to get from different kinds of businesses, you want to protect the lower rent businesses, and they're never going to be high rent because it's low density. They're just not going to get that profit margin that you can get from offices. You're just not, especially now with the tech offices, which are denser. So there's my little.
May I respond?
Sure.
They will be able to pay for a higher rent in the industrial area because they will pass those costs along to the consumer.
They're being moved out. The landlords, no, you cannot. So it's unconstitutional. You cannot force anybody to rent to somebody. You can put the zoning there. You cannot say to landlords what the rent is.
The ones that are already there. In other words, you've got an old industrial complex that's been there for 40 years. Okay? Now the land, everybody, all the real estate people want the land so that they can build something they're going to make a lot more money because of the value of the land, because of the density around it.
That's right.
But you want to keep the industrial there, right? That's the objective.
I do.
So what you do is you make, because what's going to happen, and has already happened, is the base cost of the land, the underlying land, has gone up. Well, for those owners who own those projects, if their rents can reflect that increased value of the land plus their building into a return that is satisfiable to them in their rent, then basically they're not going to sell because they can see their.
The businesses cannot afford to pay those rents.
Let me go to the next thing. They can afford to pay those rents when they increase their costs. For instance, it costs me when I have an air conditioning guy come out to one of our schools to do air conditioning on the job, right? It's $100 an hour. I know what the rate is, okay? What it's going to be in Berkeley is it's going to be $300 an hour. Now, you're cringing at that, but if you want an air conditioning guy out to fix your air conditioning, that's what the cost is going to be, so he can afford to pay the rent that's in the new cost of the industrial. Otherwise, it goes away, and it's still going to cost you $300 because your air conditioning guy is going to have to come from 5 cities over.
I think you're dreaming, and the problem in Berkeley and in San Francisco and every place else in the Bay Area is that the smart growth planners are they're not enforcing the zoning, and they're letting this property.
No, they're overlaying the zoning.
I'm telling you,
they're
no, they're not
overlaying
overlaying it. They're just ignoring it, and you have a lot of illegal conversions of industrial building into tech offices, and that is what's happening when it goes to the Planning Commission. They said, oh, okay, we're just going to go along, and now we're going to authorize the illegal zone. I write about this now.
Okay. Anyway, the other thing, and forgive me for opposing you, is that her people over there may not be able to, her industrial people, are not going to be able to pass their costs on if they're competing against people in Nevada and Arizona where the costs aren't going up. And that's the concern.
We're just talking about livable. I thought we were talking about the industrial and the people, the industrial workers, or the people who are doing, like, as she says, the small.
No, I mean, I think the basic issue is that they may their competition may very well not be local.
It depends. Printers, that's really true. They got wiped out.
I mean, it's, yes, I'm sorry.
I mean, this is a sort of a free market approach to all of these kinds of issues. And if the free market won't allow these industrial businesses to survive in that location, well, maybe they need to move. But there's other costs involved. You've got OSHA, you've got Obamacare, you've got all kinds of regulations. I mean, if there's a parallel in my world where we have farmers, and there's a tremendous demand for housing. Well, not tremendous. I mean, it's Madison, Wisconsin, and the surrounds. But I mean, there is in one area, Epic, which is a medical, it's a medical software.
Electronic records.
Electronic records. They established their main office they were in Madison, Wisconsin. Madison, Wisconsin actually threw them out. They said, we don't want you. They got 7,000 jobs right now, and they're growing. Little Verona, Wisconsin said, we'll take you. And they had to jump through all kinds of hoops for all of the environmental stuff. It's actually because these are all the millennials they sent out to the suburbs, which is brilliant. But what was my point? No, my point is that there is, it's the farmers wanted to sell that land, and everyone was saying, oh my God, you can't sell it because we won't have any food production, we're all going to starve. And this is literally what the discussion was. Well, it turns out that there was planning that was done intergovernmental. Anyway, they got it all through. But the farmers wanted to sell their land. Other farmers can't afford to buy the land anymore. The cost of the land is too high. But we have thousands, I don't know how many acres of land we have, and houses were built there. We have tremendous economic boost, not only in Verona, because most of Verona is still a little city. Madison has benefited substantially from that. But, I mean, I guess the point is that there is a market, and we do have to, there is a cost benefit to all of this, and we have to.
Yeah, on the agricultural thing, this country has taken out of production since 1950 an area the size of Texas plus Oklahoma, and doubled its agricultural production. Yes.
And what I was going to say is, if you were in the Bay Area, people would be screaming to conserve the farms, and that would be the end of the discussion.
Yeah.
You would have built an urban growth boundary, nobody could build any houses, and that's what we're fighting.
Sure.
All of this land is now conservation easements.
Right.
The zoning for industrial sanctuaries and light industrial has to be protected. And they can't just move. They have to be where the rails are, where the roads are, where the water is, and where freight-oriented development spots are. They can't move. And you have real estate people coming in, and I was a broker for 16 years. You have real estate people coming in and saying, well, you got a pretty view of the water here. And so they come in, they make their momentary money, and they leave. And you have a little bit of rent or a little bit of taxes, if you have a property tax, from that property, and that's it. When you leave your jobs there, you have people, blue-collar workers, white-collar workers, everybody walking down there, being right there. It's in their community. They do baseball, they do sports, they help out with things, they give you jobs, and they continue to pay into the tax base over and over and over, which you're never going to receive from those properties. And continuing to convert, when you drive around, whether it's New York or any of the harbors, to continue to take good manufacturing jobs, because someday we're going to go back to manufacturing of some sort, or we're never going to make it as a nation. But you have welders, casters, dyers, just regular things that you need, that need to stay in the community.
And those businesses need to be profitable so they can stay.
They are profitable.
They are
but
profitable.
They can't pay. They're not.
But they can't go up to. They can't face what a real estate market says for one person that wants to go there, buy that land at that moment, much higher than that person can have at that second.
It's because they're. I asked that question of an economist who has actually given huge reports. Linda House-Rast, she's did overseen $1 million reports for metropolitan transportation on goods movement. It's not just manufacturing. It's the whole industrial complex. It's right. And what
you stink. You
I said,
smell.
well, why can't they pay the rent? She said it's because they are inherently low density businesses, as opposed to they can't be as productive as office kinds of developments. There's not as much enterprise going on in the same space. There never will be. It's not, they're profitable. They just don't make the profits that you get off of a new office.
Somebody that will walk in and steal the land.
Much of the problem is caused by the regulatory system. And if we were talking about Oklahoma City or Kansas City or Indianapolis or Columbus or Dallas, Fort Worth, there would be much less of a problem. And that's the real problem here, is this over-regulation.
I own 4 buildings in this situation. I'm in for a request to have the zoning changed to allow us, when the market is there, to do a mixed-use development. We could do offices, we could do residential. The old railroad is long gone. There's a court case trying to keep it there. The courts ruled there's no demand for freight on this. but it's in one of these light industrial preserves. Unfortunately, the workers are having to drive a 45-minute commute, so if companies are moving out there, and one of them was a window manufacturer, previous tenant, they're not building any more houses. Windows,
Seattle, sir?
yes, it is. It's in Kirkland, and it's moving out. The businesses are moving out. So we're faced with a situation of having steel industrial buildings from the 1960s with vacant spaces, and we have no regulatory ability to feasibly redevelop it into what the market is becoming. And it's been this idea that we have to preserve these jobs. Well, the jobs have left. The other interesting thing about it is that those that are still in this area, one of the drivers is the workers can't afford to live there or choose not to. They usually have families with children in schools and single-family houses. If we're allowed to build residential on this, then we would actually be able to provide affordable housing close to where the remaining industrial jobs are. But I think you made some points. They're not necessarily ball bearing manufacturers, but they are manufacturers of avionics and a little more higher end stuff. So we've gone through this, but the experience really is this protectionism. First, it's a violation of free market principles. Protectionism has rarely worked anywhere, and the realities of it are very different than what we're hearing.
I just wanted to continue the analogy with the farmers. You have farmers that have, 180 acres. They don't need to farm all of those acres, and they really need the money for retirement. Let them sell 20 acres or 40 acres and to do something. And it's the same thing with, just as you're saying, with these industrial areas. Let them sort of bring them up to where they need to be. Maybe these, maybe it's a unique thing in your area.
No, it's not.
Well, I can tell you.
We just don't know about it.
Well, I can look at, we have a whole industrial area in Madison. It's not industrial anymore. And so.
Why not?
It's not because Bancroft Dairies moved their operation to a place that was easier for them to operate, get their trucks in and out than downtown
Yeah, but
Madison.
we have two different cases here. One case is where the industry's moved out voluntarily, so now he's got this vacant land wants to rezone. It's another thing in Berkeley. But I'm already paying $200 an hour for an auto mechanic in one of these little industrial parks, and he's got Prop 13, so that's protecting his property taxes most likely. But I still don't want to see all of a sudden it's going up to $300.
Or do you want to drive
Can't just
70
move
miles
him
to have your
out.
car?
How far can I drive to get my car?
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
That's her case.
That is
Wendell, I don't think you were on the bus yesterday because, when we were in Golden, the architect specifically mentioned, or somebody who was on the bus specifically mentioned, that, you got the University of Colorado there, which they do a lot of creating of industry. And he says all of these industries that are created around in the small industrial areas that they have around them, who need to expand when their businesses start to really grow, have to leave Golden.
Right.
Because there's no way that they can expand.
Boulder.
I'm sorry, Boulder.
Right.
Boulder, yeah. I'm thinking of Gold, well, I'm the brewery,
He's
excuse me.
referring to Boulder.
Well, there's some other upstart.
But so they can't grow. So consequently, all those jobs leave Boulder and have to go someplace else to expand their businesses. So that's the basic combination when you have those types of NIMBYism throughout a city. And the fun part about the whole bus trip yesterday was when he was saying that the University of Colorado, which is expanding tremendously, is not covered by any of the rules and regulations of Boulder. So they've got a catch-22 situation where the university can basically do whatever the heck it wants, and it's outside of the zoning requirements, and it drives the people in Boulder crazy.
And this is what you're talking about is why California is bleeding businesses at this point.
They're all going to Nevada. I mean, big
Texas and Arizona.
signs on the California-Nevada. Thank you, California.
Right. Yeah.
So, one of my good friends is an economist who was founded and then ran the Office of Economic Development in Berkeley for many years. Neil Mayer is retired now. And the situation that we heard described in terms of the small, innovative startups having to, when they flourish, having to leave because there's not enough building stock in the city. What Neil said, you know what? We decided that was a sign of success, and that what Berkeley's going to be is an incubator for that kind of economic activity. There are going to be other places that are going to come to, other businesses will take their place because they want to be there. Not every place can be the same. Not every place can be not every place has to have endless expansion.
Well, you have a limited inventory anyways, right?
Right, but is that a problem, or is that just the way it
Depends
is?
on how you
Something
look
that
at
we
it.
see necessarily as
All
that's
depends on
where
how you
our
look at
town
it.
Did you have a point back there? Okay. Are we about finished here, you think?
We finish up at noon,
Okay.
and I don't know what my watch is.
2 minutes.
It's
Okay.
You're there.
Yeah.
But you have
And
a
so
minute.
lunch is just served
Yeah, right.
outside, and I think we have one announcement.
People are willing to
It,
move to a walkable community.
No, I haven't. No.
Announcement is.
Yeah, wait a minute.
Research
Hang
Hang
on, Todd, hang on
Well,
for just a
and-
second.
yeah, yeah.
Wendell, hang on for just a second. Go ahead, I don't know what your announcement is.
oh, well, I was glad to wait till then. Lunch is outside there. If you, they're serving beef. If you are a vegetarian, you need a little green tag to stick in front of your
What's
plate.
the meat is being served?
I'm vegetarian.
It's
It's
beef.
a buffet lunch.
Thank you, Wendell.
You bet, thank you. Thank you.